The first time my husband called me just a cashier in front of his entire family, it wasn't during a fight. It was during a staff meeting. I was standing behind Register 3 at Hargrove Market on Maple Avenue in Cedar Falls, Iowa, still wearing my name tag, when he laughed and said it into a microphone. "Relax," he told his uncle and 2 department managers. "She doesn't need to be in this conversation. She just rings people up. My name is Evelyn Carter Hargrove." I was 32 years old that morning. And that was the moment I realized my marriage had quietly ended long before I ever thought about leaving. If you've ever been underestimated by the people closest to you, stay with me. Like the video, leave a comment about where you're listening from, and subscribe if stories about family drama, betrayal, and cold revenge feel familiar. This isn't a rant. It's what happened after I stopped pretending not to notice. I didn't cry when Michael Hargrove, my husband of 7 years, said it. I didn't argue. I smiled politely, the way you do when you're at work and someone higher up decides your dignity is optional. The meeting continued without me. They talked about expansion, vendor contracts, a possible second location. Michael stood at the front with his father, Robert Hargrove, who founded Hargrove Market 35 years earlier. Robert nodded proudly, while my husband talked about margins and branding, like he'd built the place himself. I scanned groceries while they planned futures. That had been my role for a long time. I met Michael when I was 24. He was charming, ambitious, already managing one of his father's stores. I was between jobs, helping my grandmother after surgery, working nights at a pharmacy. He liked that I was grounded, his word. We married fast. Moved into a modest house 10 minutes from the store. I took the cashier job because it was easy and close and temporary. Temporary turned into 7 years. I worked 40 hours a week, sometimes more, covered shifts when people called out, trained new hires, balanced drawers with 0 discrepancies for 3 years straight. Customers asked for me by name. Elderly regulars waited in my line because I remembered their stories. At home, none of that counted. To Michael, I was background stability, useful, quiet, replaceable. His mother, Linda Hargrove, liked to remind me of that in softer language. "You're lucky," she'd say. "Not everyone gets to work with family." Family. That word did a lot of work in that house. The meeting ended. Michael didn't look at me afterward, just handed the mic back to the assistant manager, Todd Keller, and walked out with his father, already discussing lunch. I finished my shift. Clocked out at 4:02 p.m., drove home alone. That evening, Michael came in late, dropped his keys on the counter and said, "You could have stayed out of the way better today." I didn't ask what he meant. "I embarrassed you?" I said. He laughed, like I'd missed the joke. "Don't make this a thing, Ev. It's business." That was when I stopped explaining myself, not out of anger, out of exhaustion. 3 days later, my phone rang at 6:13 a.m. The caller ID said Miriam Lawson, attorney at law. I answered because something in my chest already knew. "Mrs. Carter Hargrove," she said, voice calm, practiced. "I'm calling regarding the estate of your grandmother, Dorothy Ellis." My grandmother, the woman who raised me after my mother died, who taught me to read financial pages before fiction, who never once commented on Michael's job title, but always asked me what I was learning. "She passed away peacefully yesterday evening," Miriam said. "I'm sorry for your loss." I sat down on the edge of the bed. "There's a will," she continued, "and you are the sole beneficiary." The room felt very still. "Can you tell me?" I started. "Yes," Miriam said, anticipating the question. "The estate is valued at approximately $35 million. She said it the way you say the weather. $35 million. I didn't scream. I didn't gasp. I didn't even cry. I thanked her, wrote down the appointment time, hung up. Michael was still asleep. I stood there for a long time, listening to his breathing, thinking about the way my grandmother used to watch people without interrupting them. She had known. That morning, I went to work like nothing had changed. I rang up milk and bread, smiled at Mrs. Jensen, who always paid in exact change, helped a teenager apply for a rewards card. At noon, Michael walked past my register and said, "Hey, we're meeting with suppliers tonight. Don't wait up." I nodded. At 12:47 p.m., I received an email from Miriam Lawson with the subject line, Estate documentation attached. I didn't open it at work. I didn't tell anyone. Because the thing about being invisible for a long time is that you learn how much people reveal when they think you don't matter. That night, alone in my car, I finally opened the documents. Accounts, holdings, private equity, commercial real estate, cash reserves. My grandmother hadn't been modest. She'd been quiet. I understood then why she'd always told me, watch how people treat you when they think you can't leave. I drove home, parked in the driveway of the house Michael thought he controlled, and sat there until the porch light clicked on. I didn't feel powerful. I felt clear. And that clarity came with a single, undeniable truth. Everything I'd accepted as permanent was about to become optional. Michael thought I was just a cashier. His family thought I was part of the background. They had no idea they were standing inside something I could afford to buy. And I hadn't even decided yet whether I wanted to. I didn't tell Michael about my grandmother that night. I cooked dinner like usual. Pasta, jarred sauce. Nothing that suggested anything had shifted under our feet. He ate while scrolling through emails, half listening as I talked about a customer who tried to pay with expired coupons. That store attracts idiots, he said without looking up. I watched him chew. I watched him exist in the comfort of certainty. After dinner, he showered and went straight to bed. I stayed up, laptop open, rereading the documents Miriam Lawson had sent. Every number matched what my grandmother had hinted at over the years, but never confirmed. She believed in preparation, not performance. Around midnight, I noticed something else. The trust wasn't passive. Dorothy Ellis hadn't just left me money. She'd left me control. Voting shares. Liquid assets. A clause that allowed immediate acquisition of operating businesses with existing revenue. No waiting period. No committee approval. It was as if she'd anticipated exactly what kind of world I was living in. The next morning, I clocked in at 7:58 a.m. Michael was already there, pacing near the customer service desk, irritated about a delivery delay. He pointed at a pallet and snapped at Carlos Mendoza, the produce supervisor, like frustration was a currency he needed to spend loudly. When he noticed me, his tone changed. "Hey," he said, "can you cover Register 1 later? Todd's out." "Sure," I replied. No resentment, no edge. That was my first experiment. I wanted to see how long it would take before anyone noticed I'd stopped emotionally reacting. The answer was never. At 10:30 a.m., Linda Hargrove, my mother-in-law, came in carrying her designer purse like a badge. She always visited mid-morning, when the store was calm and employees had nowhere to hide. She leaned against my register. "You look tired," she said. "I'm fine," I replied. She smiled thinly. "You should take better care of yourself. Michael's under a lot of pressure." I nodded. She glanced at my name tag. "You've been here a long time." "Yes," I said. She didn't ask if I wanted more. That afternoon, Miriam Lawson emailed again, asking to confirm our meeting time. I replied from my phone during my break, careful to keep my screen angled away from cameras. At 3:15 p.m., Michael pulled me aside. "You didn't mess up the till today, right?" he asked casually. "No," I said. "It balanced." "Good," he said. "We can't afford mistakes right now." I almost smiled. That night, Michael announced at dinner that the store was facing temporary cash flow challenges. "Nothing serious," he said, "but Dad's being cautious." I took a sip of water. "What does that mean?" He shrugged. "We might need to renegotiate some supplier terms, delay a few upgrades." "And payroll?" I asked. He waved it off. "You'll be fine. You'll be fine." Another phrase that assumes loyalty without respect. 2 days later, I met Miriam Lawson in person. Her office overlooked the Des Moines River, all glass and clean lines. She slid a thick folder across the table. "Your grandmother was very specific," she said. "She updated her will 18 months ago." "Why then?" I asked. Miriam folded her hands. "She was concerned about how you were being treated." I didn't react. "She included a letter," Miriam continued. "For you." I opened it carefully. "Evelyn, if you're reading this, it means I was right to wait. You don't owe anyone comfort at the expense of your dignity. Watch who speaks for you when you're quiet. And never forget, ownership changes tone faster than arguments ever will. Love, Grandma D." I closed the letter and placed it back in the folder. "What are my options?" I asked. Miriam didn't hesitate. anything legal. That weekend, the Hargroves hosted a family dinner. Robert Hargrove sat at the head of the table, carving meat, talking about legacy. Michael echoed him, finishing sentences like a shadow, eager to prove usefulness. I sat between Linda and Susan Whitaker, Michael's cousin, who worked in marketing and never missed a chance to ask what I was doing now. "I'm still at the store," I said. Susan nodded. "That's stable." Linda smiled approvingly. During dessert, Robert announced something important. "We're considering selling minority shares of the store," he said. "Strategic investors." Michael beamed. "It's the smart move." I set my fork down. "Selling to whom?" I asked. Robert looked surprised I'd spoken. "We're exploring options." Michael shot me a look. A warning. I nodded. "Makes sense." That night, as we drove home, Michael was quiet. Finally, he said, "You don't need to involve yourself in business conversations." "I didn't," I replied. "You asked questions," he snapped. "I asked one," I said calmly. He exhaled hard. "Just stay in your lane." I stared out the window. My lane had always been defined by other people's comfort. What they didn't know was that my grandmother had just given me an entirely different road. On Sunday evening, I reviewed Hargrove Market's public filings, sales data, debt structure, vendor obligations. The store wasn't failing. It was over-leveraged, mismanaged, and vulnerable. I realized something else then. $35 million wasn't just freedom, it was leverage. And leverage, used quietly, doesn't look like revenge. It looks like inevitability. I closed my laptop and turned off the light. Michael slept beside me, unaware that the ground under his certainty was already shifting. I didn't feel excitement, I felt patience. And patience, when paired with timing, becomes something very hard to stop. The first offer came before anyone knew I had the ability to make one. That was the advantage. I didn't rush into buying anything. I didn't call brokers or announce intentions. I spent 2 weeks doing something I'd been doing my entire marriage without anyone noticing, I observed. At the store, I watched how deliveries arrived late and no one followed up. I watched Todd Keller, the assistant manager, approve overtime without tracking margins. I watched Michael override discounts at the register for customers he wanted to impress, then complain about thin profits at dinner. I watched Robert Hargrove avoid numbers that made him uncomfortable. The store wasn't struggling. It was bleeding slowly from 1,000 small decisions no one wanted to admit were mistakes. One afternoon, while I was scanning groceries for a man named Harold Jensen, Michael walked up behind me. After work, he said quietly, "We're meeting with the bank." I didn't look up. "About what?" "Credit restructuring," he said. "Dad wants support." Support. Another word that meant presence without authority. "Do I need to be there?" I asked. He laughed softly. "No, it's not your world." I nodded. "Okay." That night, while Michael and Robert sat in a glass conference room downtown, explaining their vision to a junior loan officer, I sat at home with my laptop open, reviewing the same financials they were presenting. The difference was, I understood leverage. By midnight, I had identified 3 suppliers the store relied on heavily, and 1 local distributor who'd been quietly buying debt at a discount. I emailed Miriam Lawson. "I'd like to speak with an acquisition specialist." Quietly. She replied 15 minutes later, already arranging it. 2 days later, Michael came home, frustrated. "The bank's tightening," he said. "They want more collateral." "That's tough," I said. He looked at me sharply. "You don't get it." "I get that margins matter," I replied. "And cash flow." He stared at me for a second, like he was trying to decide if I was mocking him. Then he scoffed. "You read something online?" I smiled. "I pay attention." That weekend, Linda Hargrove stopped by unannounced. She walked through the house like she owned it, commenting on dust and groceries. "You know," she said, standing in my kitchen, "Michael carries a lot. It would help if you found something more flexible, maybe part-time." I looked at her. "Why?" "So you're available when the family needs you," she said. There it was. Availability without value. "I like my job," I said. She tilted her head. "It's not a career." I met her eyes. "Neither is entitlement." She stiffened. "Excuse me?" I said, "I like my job," I repeated calmly. She left shortly after. That night, Michael accused me of being disrespectful. "You embarrassed my mother," he said. "I answered her honestly," I replied. He shook his head. You're pushing your luck. I almost laughed. On Monday, I met Daniel Ross, the acquisition specialist Miriam recommended. He was in his 40s, efficient, and unimpressed by drama. We met in a private office suite in Omaha, not far enough to feel inconvenient, far enough to avoid overlap. I understand you're interested in grocery retail, he said. I'm interested in undervalued assets with predictable cash flow, I replied. He nodded. Specific targets? Yes, I said, but I don't want my name attached. He smiled slightly. That's easy. I handed him a folder. Inside was Hargrove Market's financial footprint. He flipped through it without surprise. This business is overexposed, he said, but not unsalvageable. What would it take to control it? I asked. He didn't hesitate. Debt acquisition first, then equity. How quietly? I asked. Very, he said. That night, Michael came home excited. We may have an investor, he said. Dad's optimistic. I poured myself a glass of water. That's good. You don't seem impressed, he said. I trust numbers, I replied. He rolled his eyes. You're impossible sometimes, I smiled. The following week, Robert Hargrove announced a mandatory family meeting. Everyone gathered at his house. Linda, Susan, Michael. A few extended relatives who liked to feel included. I sat at the far end of the table, unnoticed. Robert cleared his throat. We're restructuring, bringing in outside capital. Linda clasped her hands. Finally. Michael glanced at me, smug. This is big. I nodded. Congratulations. Susan turned to me. You probably don't need to worry about this stuff. No, I said. I don't. The room laughed lightly. That night, after everyone left, Michael confronted me in the kitchen. You've been weird, he said. Detached. I've been paying attention, I replied. He scoffed. To what? Barcodes? I looked at him. Do you know how much debt the store carries? I asked. He blinked. Dad handles that. How many months of operating cash do you have? I continued. Why are you asking? He snapped. I tilted my head. Just curious. He stared at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. Stay out of it, he said finally. You're not built for this. That sentence settled into me, not painfully, cleanly. Because it clarified something I'd been avoiding. Michael didn't underestimate me by accident. He needed me small. The next morning, I signed the first documents with Daniel Ross. They weren't purchase agreements. They were options. Leverage points. Quiet footholds. I still wore my cashier uniform that afternoon. Still smiled at customers. Still clocked out on time. But now, every beep of the scanner sounded different. Not because I was angry. Because I was counting. Michael thought he was negotiating his future. Robert thought he was preserving a legacy. Linda thought she was protecting her son. None of them noticed the ground shifting beneath them because they were all too busy looking down at me. And that, I realized, was the last mistake they'd make without consequence. The store changed before anyone realized it had. Not visibly, not dramatically. Just enough to make the people who thought they were in control feel slightly off balance. Deliveries arrived later. Credit terms tightened. One of the regional distributors stopped extending grace periods without explanation. Robert Hargrove complained about vendors getting difficult. Michael blamed supply chain issues. Todd Keller said nothing and kept approving overtime like it was free. I rang up groceries and listened. On Wednesday morning, Michael called another staff meeting. I stood behind Register 3 again. This is just temporary, he said into the microphone. We're finalizing outside investment. He smiled while saying it, like optimism alone could stabilize cash flow. Someone asked about hours. Michael glanced at Todd. We may need to adjust schedules. I watched faces tighten. People who'd worked there longer than me suddenly understood how thin things were. At home that night, Michael was short-tempered. People are panicking, he said, tossing his jacket over a chair. It's annoying. Why? I asked. Because they don't see the big picture, he replied. I nodded. Do you? He frowned. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing, I said. Just curious. He didn't press. He never did when answers might challenge his confidence. That weekend, Linda Hargrove invited herself over again. She sat at our dining table, tapping her nails on the surface. Robert is stressed, she said. This restructuring is complicated. I'm sure, I replied. She leaned in. Michael needs support at home, not questions. I met her gaze. Support isn't silence. Her mouth tightened. You're getting ideas above your station. I smiled politely. I've always had ideas. She laughed softly. Ideas don't mean execution. She didn't know how right she was. Monday morning, Daniel Ross called. We've acquired controlling interest in 2 of their outstanding debts, he said. Quietly. How did it go? I asked. No resistance, he replied. They were eager to offload. I stared at the store entrance from my car. Automatic doors opening and closing. Customers flowing in, unaware. Next steps, I asked. Patience, Daniel said. And timing. Timing was my specialty. That afternoon, Robert called Michael into his office. I saw them through the glass while I rang up a customer. Robert's shoulders were tense. Michael gestured too much. A sign he was trying to sound confident without substance. They emerged an hour later, quieter. At dinner, Michael pushed his food around. The investors are dragging, he said. They want more transparency. That makes sense, I replied. He glanced at me suspiciously. You've been weirdly calm about all this. I trust outcomes, I said. He scoffed. You wouldn't understand. That night, I received another email from Miriam Lawson. The estate transfer is complete. Funds fully accessible. $35 million. Sitting cleanly in accounts no one but me could touch. I didn't feel excitement. I felt gravity. The following week, the Hargroves scheduled a formal meeting with potential investors. They chose a private conference room at a downtown hotel. Robert insisted on family attendance, for unity. Michael told me to come, but sit quietly. I wore a simple blouse. Neutral. Unremarkable. Daniel Ross attended as well. Not with me. With them. He introduced himself as a representative of a private investment group. Shook hands, smiled politely, asked careful questions. Questions Robert struggled to answer. Michael fumbled through projections. Daniel listened. At one point, Daniel asked, "Who currently controls the majority of your outstanding obligations?" Robert hesitated. Various entities. Daniel nodded. Can you specify? Silence stretched. I watched Michael's jaw tighten. After the meeting, Michael cornered me in the hallway. You knew something, he said quietly. I tilted my head. About what? You weren't surprised, he snapped. I didn't need to be, I replied. He stared at me like he was seeing me clearly for the first time. And not liking it. That night, Robert called an emergency family meeting. Linda sat rigid. Susan looked uncomfortable. Michael paced. We're being pressured, Robert said. Someone's consolidating our debt. Linda gasped. Who would do that? Michael's eyes flicked to me, then away. We'll manage, Robert continued. We always do. I stayed silent, not because I was afraid, because silence was now strategic. The next morning, I requested time off. Michael looked annoyed. Why now? Personal matters, I said. He rolled his eyes. Fine, but don't disappear. I drove to Omaha. Daniel Ross laid everything out. Timelines, options, outcomes. With your capital, he said, you can acquire the remaining shares within weeks. And then? I asked. Then you decide, he said. I thought about Register 3, about the microphone, about being told to stay in my lane. I want the full acquisition, I said. Every store. Quietly, Daniel nodded. That will take coordination. I have patience, I replied. On my drive back, my phone buzzed. Michael, where are you? He asked. Out, I said. Doing what? Handling things, I replied. He laughed. You don't handle things like this. I smiled to myself. That evening, Linda called. Robert is worried, she said. You've been distant. I've been busy, I replied. With what? She pressed. I paused. Planning, she scoffed. You think you matter in this? I looked out the window at the quiet street. Yes, I said. She hung up. 2 days later, the first formal notice arrived at Hargrove Market. Debt restructuring. Change of creditor. Robert called an emergency meeting. Michael slammed his fist on the table. Someone's playing games with us. I sat at my register and scanned items, listening to the panic ripple through a business that had never considered the possibility of losing control. For the first time since I married into this family, the power dynamic wasn't implied. It was shifting, and they still had no idea whose hands were on the wheel. Not yet. By the time Robert Hargrove admitted something was wrong, it was already too late to reverse quietly. He called Michael into the store early on a Tuesday, before customers arrived. I knew because Michael slammed the door hard enough to rattle the framed photos in our hallway. They're squeezing us, he said, pacing. Credit lines are tightening across the board. Vendors want guarantees. The bank wants answers. I poured coffee. That sounds serious. He stopped pacing and stared at me. You don't even care. I care about outcomes, I said. Not panic. He scoffed. You wouldn't last a day making decisions like this. I didn't respond. At work, the atmosphere changed. Employees whispered. Schedules were cut. Todd Keller avoided eye contact when he handed out revised shifts. Customers complained about missing products. The store still functioned, but the confidence was gone. I watched Michael try to manage fear with volume. It didn't work. That afternoon, Robert gathered the management team in his office. I wasn't invited, but the walls were thin, and Michael spoke loudly when he felt cornered. We need liquidity, Michael said. Now, Robert sighed. We need leverage. I almost laughed. That night, Daniel Ross emailed me an update. Remaining debt acquired. Negotiations underway for equity consolidation. Timeline accelerated. I replied with one word. Proceed. 2 days later, Linda Hargrove showed up at my register again. You should come by the house tonight, she said. Family dinner. I work late, I replied. She smiled tightly. Make time. I did. At dinner, Robert looked older. His posture had softened, like gravity was finally getting its way. Michael sat stiffly, jaw clenched. Linda hovered, trying to manage the mood with forced warmth. We're facing external pressure, Robert said, staring at his plate. Unexpected, Michael jumped in. But we're handling it. I took a bite of food and listened. Susan Whitaker leaned toward me. Must be stressful for you, she said quietly. Working there, with all this. It's instructive, I replied. She frowned, unsure how to take that. Linda cleared her throat. Evelyn, maybe it's time you considered stepping away from the store. I looked up. Why? It's not appropriate for family right now, she said. Optics. Michael nodded. You could take a break. Focus on home. There it was. Removal, disguised as concern. If I leave, I said evenly. Who covers my shifts? Todd, Michael said quickly. We'll manage. I nodded. So I'm expendable. Robert sighed. Don't take it personally. I met his eyes. Everything in business is personal when it's selective. The table went quiet. Michael slammed his fork down. This isn't about you. No, I said. It never is. Until it is. I stood. Thank you for dinner. Linda stared at me like I'd broken a rule she'd never had to explain. At home, Michael exploded. What the hell was that? He demanded. I answered honestly, I replied. You embarrassed us, he snapped. You embarrassed yourself, I said calmly. By trying to erase me, he laughed bitterly. You think you're important now? I looked at him. I think you've underestimated the wrong person. He scoffed. You ring groceries, I nodded. And you inherited a business you don't understand. That was the first time he looked afraid. The next morning, I was removed from the schedule. No warning, no conversation. Todd avoided me when I came in. I'm sorry, he muttered. Orders from Michael. I handed in my badge. It's fine. I walked out of Hargrove Market without raising my voice. In the parking lot, I sat in my car and breathed. Not because I was devastated, because the final excuse they had for dismissing me was gone. That afternoon, Daniel Ross called. They're panicking, he said, trying to identify the creditor, consolidating their debt. Let them, I replied. We can move faster, he added. If you want. I want control, I said. Not spectacle. Understood, he said. That evening, Michael came home furious. They cut your hours? He demanded. They removed me, I said. He hesitated. That's temporary. I met his eyes. Is it? He didn't answer. 3 days later, Robert received formal notice. A majority of the store's outstanding obligations were now held by a single entity, an entity requesting a meeting. Michael stormed into the house, waving paperwork. Do you know who this is? He asked. I glanced at the document. Yes, I don't, I said. He watched my face carefully. You're acting strange. I shrugged. I was just fired. He scoffed. You'll get over it. I smiled faintly. He had no idea what had just happened. Losing my job didn't weaken me. It removed the last layer of camouflage. I was no longer pretending to belong. I was preparing to own. The meeting was scheduled for the following week. Neutral location. Legal representatives present. Robert insisted Michael attend. Linda insisted on coming. They still believed they were negotiating from strength. I didn't correct them. I simply adjusted my calendar. Because when the meeting happened, they wouldn't be sitting across from a faceless creditor. They would be sitting across from me. And for the first time in my life, I would not be asking to be seen. I would be deciding what they were worth. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday at 10 a.m. Neutral ground. Law offices downtown. Glass walls. Too much light. Michael didn't tell me about it. I knew anyway. Daniel Ross forwarded the agenda the night before. Concise and clinical. Attendees listed by full name. Legal counsel present for both sides. Majority creditor representative to lead discussion. My name wasn't on the list. Not yet. That morning, Michael dressed carefully. Navy suit, conservative tie. The one he wore when he wanted to look like the adult in the room. "Wish me luck," he said, grabbing his keys. "With what?" I asked. He paused, suspicious. "You know, business." I nodded. "Be honest." He snorted. "You wouldn't understand." The door closed behind him. At 9:55 a.m., I walked into the same building through a different entrance. Daniel Ross met me in the lobby. Calm, unhurried. "You ready?" he asked. "Yes," I said. He handed me a slim folder. "Once we start, there's no reversing tone." "I'm not here to negotiate tone," I replied. We took the elevator together. When the conference room door opened, the air shifted. Robert Hargrove was seated at the head of the table, hands folded, jaw tight. Linda sat beside him, posture rigid, lips pressed thin. Michael stood near the window, phone in hand, mid-text. They all looked up at once. Michael's face drained of color. "What is this?" he said. Daniel stepped forward. "Mr. Hargrove, Mrs. Hargrove, Mr. Hargrove, thank you for meeting. This is Evelyn Carter." Robert frowned. "We know who she is." Daniel smiled politely. "You know who she was." Silence stretched. Linda was the first to recover. "This is inappropriate," she said. "Evelyn has nothing to do with this." Daniel glanced at me. "Actually," I said calmly, "I have everything to do with it." Michael laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. "You're joking." I took a seat across from them. "I'm not," I said. Robert's voice dropped. "Explain." Daniel slid documents across the table. "Ms. Carter is the principal behind the entity that currently holds controlling interest in your outstanding debt." Linda gasped. Michael stared at me like he was trying to reconcile two images that refused to merge. "You?" he said. "You can't." "I can," I replied. And I did. Robert rubbed his temples. "This is some kind of setup." "No," I said. "It's an acquisition." Michael turned to Daniel. "This is unethical." Daniel remained calm. "It's legal." "Thoroughly." Linda stood abruptly. "This is revenge." I looked at her. "This is business." She scoffed. "You're doing this because you're bitter." I tilted my head. "I'm doing this because I was dismissed." Michael stepped forward. "You were fired because you were disrespectful." I met his eyes. "I was removed because I stopped being convenient." Robert raised a hand. "Enough." He looked at me. Really looked. "How long?" he asked. "Long enough," I replied. Daniel resumed control of the meeting. "Ms. Carter has several options available: continued restructuring, full acquisition, or divestment under revised terms." Michael shook his head. "This is insane." "No," I said quietly. "This is what happens when you confuse proximity with power." Linda's voice trembled. "You married into this family." "Yes," I said. "And you never let me forget it." Robert exhaled slowly. "What do you want?" The room stilled. "I want transparency," I said. "I want competent management. And I want the store run by people who understand the work." Michael laughed bitterly. "And you think that's you?" "I think I understand it better than you do," I replied. "I worked the floor. I balanced drawers. I watched customers leave because no one listened." "You scanned groceries," he snapped. I leaned forward. "I watched you bleed money with ego." Silence. Daniel cleared his throat. "Ms. Carter is prepared to move forward with full acquisition pending final approval." Linda sank back into her chair. Robert stared at the table. "If we refuse?" Daniel replied evenly. "Then terms accelerate." Michael looked at me. "You're destroying us." I shook my head. "You did that when you decided I was disposable." The meeting ended without handshakes. No agreement reached. That was fine. Outside, Daniel walked beside me to the elevator. "They're going." "I know," I replied. And they'll make mistakes, he added. I'm counting on it, I said. That evening, Michael came home furious. You humiliated me, he shouted. I didn't raise my voice, I replied. You planned this, he accused. Yes, I said. He stared at me like I was a stranger. You think money makes you powerful? I met his gaze. No, it just removes excuses. He scoffed. You'll regret this. I nodded. I already considered that. The next week was chaos. Lawyers, calls, emails. Linda tried pleading. Robert tried negotiating. Michael tried threatening. I stayed quiet. I let Daniel handle communication. Every day, Hargrove Market lost ground. Suppliers tightened. Employees whispered. Customers noticed shelves thinning. And then, quietly, the final piece clicked into place. Daniel called on Friday afternoon. Equity secured, he said. We're ready. Proceed, I replied. On Monday morning, Robert Hargrove received formal notice. Ownership transfer pending. Majority control approved. Michael showed up at my door an hour later. You can't do this, he said, breathless. I looked at him steadily. I already did. He swallowed. What happens to us? I thought for a moment. That depends, I said, on how well you listen now. For the first time in our marriage, he didn't interrupt me. He just stood there, realizing the world had shifted without asking his permission. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't explaining myself. I was deciding. Control doesn't arrive all at once. It settles. The Monday after the notice went out, Hargrove Market opened like it always had. Automatic doors, fluorescent lights, the same bell chiming as customers walked in. From the outside, nothing had changed. Inside, everyone felt it. Employees whispered more carefully. Todd Keller walked with his shoulders tight, clipboard clutched like a shield. Department heads avoided making decisions, waiting for instructions that weren't coming from the same place anymore. Robert Hargrove didn't show up that morning. Michael did. He stood near the customer service desk, jaw set, phone pressed to his ear, voice low and urgent. When he saw me walk in, he froze. I wasn't wearing a uniform. I wasn't clocking in. I wore a simple blazer and jeans. Neutral. Deliberate. What are you doing here? He demanded, ending his call. I own the majority stake, I said calmly. This is my store. His face flushed. Not yet. Pending transfer, I corrected. Which means oversight begins now. Todd hovered nearby, pretending to rearrange pamphlets. Michael laughed bitterly. You think you can just walk in and take over? No, I said. I think I already have. He stepped closer. You're enjoying this. I looked at him. I'm correcting inefficiency. That afternoon, Daniel Ross and 2 operational consultants arrived. Introductions were formal. Titles mattered. Robert Hargrove's name came up often, in the past tense. The consultants asked questions, real ones, about inventory shrinkage, about scheduling redundancies, about vendor penalties no one had been tracking. I answered when needed. Michael didn't. By the end of the day, a temporary management structure was in place. Michael was still employed, but no longer in charge. He didn't speak to me that night. He packed a bag and left. Texted later. I need space, I replied. That's wise. The following weeks were uncomfortable for everyone, except the people who actually worked. Hours stabilized. Communication improved. Todd stopped approving unnecessary overtime when he had to explain it. Vendors responded differently when invoices were paid on time. Employees noticed. One cashier, a woman named Elaine Brooks, pulled me aside. I heard things, she said quietly, about ownership. Yes, I replied. She hesitated. You worked here with us. I nodded. She smiled, relieved. Good. That word mattered. Linda Hargrove tried a new approach. She showed up at my door one afternoon with cookies. I didn't invite her in. We're family, she said, holding the plate out like an offering. We were, I replied. Her eyes hardened. You're tearing this apart. I shook my head. I'm removing what was rotting. She scoffed. You think money gives you wisdom? No, I said. It gives me time to listen. Something you never did. She left without the cookies. Robert called a week later. His voice sounded tired. You could have come to me, he said. I did, I replied. For years. You didn't hear me, he sighed. You've humiliated us. I was humiliated quietly, I said. You didn't notice. Silence stretched. Michael is struggling, he said. I didn't respond. He's your husband, Robert added. For now, I said. That ended the call. The acquisition finalized on a Thursday. Ownership transferred. Signatures dry. The store was officially mine. I didn't announce it. I didn't celebrate. I scheduled meetings. One by one, I met with department heads. Not to threaten, to ask. What worked? What didn't? What they'd stopped bothering to say. The answers came fast. Too fast. That was when I understood how long everyone had been holding back. Michael returned the following Monday. He walked into my office without knocking. You did this to punish me, he said. No, I replied. I did this to survive you. He laughed harshly. You think you're better than me now? I met his eyes. I think I'm done explaining myself. He leaned forward. You can't fire me. I can, I said. But I haven't. He blinked. You still have a job, I continued. If you want one. His voice dropped. Under you? Yes. Silence. That's humiliating, he said. I tilted my head. So is being called just a cashier. He swallowed. Think about it, I said. You have until Friday. He left without another word. That evening, I sat alone in the office, long after closing. The hum of refrigerators, the faint smell of produce and floor cleaner. I thought about my grandmother, Dorothy Ellis, about the way she'd always said, ownership is responsibility, not theater. This wasn't revenge. It was exposure. Michael emailed me Thursday night. I resign. I replied with one sentence. Accepted. He moved out the next day. No argument. No apology. Just distance. The divorce filing came 2 weeks later. Straightforward. Clean. He didn't contest anything. He knew better now. At the store, people adjusted quickly. They always do, when stability replaces fear. Sales recovered. Margins tightened. Waste dropped. I promoted Elaine Brooks to front-end supervisor. She cried. I've been here 12 years, she said. No one ever asked if I wanted more. I'm asking, I replied. That was the real shift. Not power, permission. Linda stopped calling. Robert stopped trying. Michael became a footnote. And me? I stopped being careful, not reckless, clear. Because the moment I stopped trying to be acceptable, everything finally aligned. The store didn't need a savior. It needed accountability. And I was done apologizing for providing it. Power changes how people remember the past. I noticed it the week after Michael resigned. Suddenly, stories shifted. Conversations softened. People who had laughed when I was dismissed now spoke carefully, like memory itself had developed edges. Robert Hargrove came into the store unannounced on a Tuesday morning. No suit, no authority badge. Just a man in his late 60s walking through a place he no longer controlled. He stood near the bakery section for a long time before I noticed him on the security monitor, watching employees move, watching customers choose, watching something continue without him. I didn't rush out. I finished a call with a vendor first. When I stepped onto the floor, he straightened. Evelyn, he said. Robert, I replied. We stood between shelves of bread and cereal. Ordinary, public. Safe. I wanted to see it, he said. After. See what? I asked. How you're running things, he said. I nodded. You're welcome to observe, not interfere. His jaw tightened, then relaxed. Fair. We walked slowly. Employees nodded at me. Not nervously. Normally. Robert noticed. You've changed the ordering system, he said. Yes, I replied. Waste was too high. You've cut some legacy vendors, he said. They were expensive and unreliable, I said. He stopped walking. They were friends. I met his eyes. That was the problem. He exhaled slowly. You always were direct. I almost smiled. We reached the front registers. Elaine Brooks was training a new hire. Calm, focused, confident. She's good, Robert said. She was always good, I replied. No one let her lead. He nodded once. That was as close as he came to admitting fault. Linda didn't come with him. She never did after the acquisition finalized. Her absence was louder than any confrontation. The backlash came quietly. A few local suppliers complained to the community board about outsiders and loss of family values. A columnist wrote a vague piece about tradition versus modernization. I didn't respond. I let numbers do it. Sales rose steadily. Customer complaints dropped. Turnover slowed. Results don't argue. Michael's lawyer reached out the following week. Not hostile, not aggressive, practical. He wanted to negotiate terms. I agreed to meet. We sat across from each other in a neutral office. No raised voices, no drama. Michael feels displaced, his lawyer said carefully. He displaced me for years, I replied. That may be, he said, but emotions aside, he's concerned about future income. I folded my hands. So was I. The lawyer paused. You're not seeking alimony. No, I said. Division of assets? Equitable, I replied. He nodded. That simplifies things. It did. Michael never showed up to that meeting. He signed what was put in front of him. Distance was his final strategy. It didn't work. At the store, the next shift came from unexpected support. Customers. One afternoon, Mrs. Jensen leaned across the counter. I heard you're in charge now, she said. Yes, I replied. She smiled. About time. Another customer brought cookies for the staff. Said the store felt calmer, cleaner, kinder. Those words mattered because kindness is often the first thing lost in mismanaged power. That Friday, I held an all-staff meeting. Not on the floor. In the break room. Everyone stood awkwardly, unsure what to expect. I won't pretend this transition hasn't been unsettling, I said. Change usually is. Silence. But I want you to know something, I continued. No one here is invisible anymore. Elaine met my eyes. If you do your work well, you'll be seen, I said. If something isn't working, you can say so without fear. Todd Keller shifted uncomfortably. That includes management, I added. Afterward, people lingered. They asked questions, offered ideas, tested the edges of trust. That's how you know something real is happening. At home, the house felt empty. Not lonely, just quiet. I rearranged furniture, gave away things that no longer fit, changed the locks. Michael didn't ask for anything back. I think part of him understood that the house had never been his to command. One evening, Miriam Lawson called. I wanted to check in, she said. You've moved quickly. I had practice, I replied. She laughed softly. Your grandmother would be proud. I know, I said. There was a pause. You're aware, Miriam continued, that people will frame this as revenge. I don't mind, I replied. They need a story. And you? She asked. I need stability, I said. That night, I sat in my office after closing, reviewing reports. The store hummed around me. Refrigeration units, timers, systems working as intended. I thought about the first day Michael called me, just a cashier, about how small that had made me feel, and how false it was. Because cashier wasn't a limitation. It was a vantage point. I'd seen everything from there. The shortcuts, the waste, the arrogance, the people who did the work, and the ones who talked over it. I hadn't risen above the store. I'd risen through it. The next challenge came sooner than expected. A regional chain expressed interest in acquiring Hargrove Market. A generous offer, clean exit, easy profit. I read it carefully, then declined. Because this wasn't about flipping an asset. It was about building something honest from something misused. The chain would have cut staff, automated positions, erased history. I wouldn't. The real test of power isn't how quickly you can cash out. It's how long you're willing to stay responsible. Michael texted me once more that month. Just a question. Do you ever miss us? I stared at it for a long time, then replied, I miss who I thought we could be. He didn't answer, and that was fine, because the woman he underestimated no longer needed closure from him. She had direction. And the story wasn't over yet. Not for the store, not for the people who worked there, and not for me. The offer I declined didn't disappear. It multiplied. Once word got out that Hargrove Market was profitable again, efficient, and no longer bleeding cash, interest followed. Private equity groups, regional chains, even a cooperative from Minnesota that specialized in employee ownership. They all wanted meetings. I said no to most of them, not because I was sentimental, because every proposal revealed how they valued people. That was my filter now. One Tuesday afternoon, while I was reviewing payroll adjustments in my office, Elaine Brooks knocked on the door. Evelyn, she said, hesitant, there's something you should know. I looked up. What is it? She closed the door behind her. Michael's been around, my hand stilled. Where? I asked. Parking lot. Across the street. A few times this week, she said. He hasn't come in, just watches. I nodded slowly. Thank you for telling me. She hesitated. Do you want me to call someone? No, I said. Let him watch. There are moments when people realize the future continued without them. Watching is how they grieve. Michael didn't approach me. Not then. The next escalation came from Linda Hargrove. She didn't call or show up. She went to the community. She began telling a version of the story where I was manipulative, calculating, ungrateful, where I'd trapped Michael and then taken advantage of a tragedy. People listened. Some believed her. Some didn't. That was fine. The store stayed full. Employees stayed. Results don't need consensus. But the campaign intensified when she contacted the local business association. She accused me of unethical practices. That forced my hand. I scheduled a formal audit. Independent, transparent, overkill. The auditor, a woman named Karen Whitfield, spent 2 weeks combing through everything. When she finished, she handed me a report. Clean, efficient, compliant. I forwarded a copy to the association. Linda never apologized. She went quiet instead. That was her pattern. When she couldn't control the narrative, she abandoned it. Robert called me that night. I told her to stop, he said. I didn't ask you to, I replied. She's embarrassed, he added. So was I said. For years. Silence. You don't need to punish her, he said. I'm not, I replied. I'm not protecting her either, he sighed. You've changed. I looked out my office window at the parking lot, at people loading groceries, living their ordinary lives. No, I said. I've stopped compensating. That weekend, I attended a regional grocery conference, not as an employee, as an owner. I wore the same kind of neutral clothes I always had. No attempt to signal power. It confused people. A man from a Midwest chain asked me where I'd come from. I was here the whole time, I replied. A woman from a cooperative asked why I hadn't sold yet. Because I know what it's like to work without leverage, I said. I don't want to recreate that. She smiled. You're rare. I shrugged. I was trained by necessity. On Sunday evening, Michael finally showed up. He rang the doorbell like a guest. I didn't invite him in. You can't keep avoiding this, he said. I'm not avoiding, I replied. I'm prioritizing. He looked thinner, less certain. They think you're heartless, he said. Who? I asked. My family, he said. I nodded. They always did. He flinched. I didn't mean it like that. You meant exactly what you meant, I replied. You just didn't expect consequences. He swallowed. I lost everything. I met his eyes. You lost control. That was my life, he said. No, I said gently. That was your inheritance. Silence stretched. Did you ever love me? He asked. I considered the question carefully. I loved the version of you that didn't need me small, I said. But that version never stayed. He nodded, like he'd known the answer already. I don't want anything from you, he said. I know, I replied. He left without another word. The next morning, I promoted Carlos Mendoza to operations lead. He'd been with the store 14 years. Never complained. Always steady. He shook my hand like it mattered. It does, I said. That afternoon, Elaine came into my office again. People are talking, she said. About what? I asked. About how you did it, she said. Quietly. I smiled faintly. Quiet had always been my native language. The difference now was that silence wasn't submission. It was selection. I chose when to speak, when to act, when to let others reveal themselves. That night, I went through old photos, holidays, smiles, moments that had felt real once. I didn't tear anything up. I archived. That was the pattern of my life now. Nothing dramatic, nothing wasteful, just intentional endings. The final challenge was coming. I felt it. Because systems resist change hardest right before they accept it. Linda wasn't done. Robert wasn't at peace. And the community still hadn't decided who I was allowed to be. But I had. And that decision had already outpaced their opinions. The question wasn't whether they would adapt. It was whether they would do it gracefully. The confrontation happened at the annual Founders Day event. It was the one thing Robert Hargrove had insisted on keeping, even after the ownership transfer. A symbolic gathering, speeches, photos, a reminder of where the store came from. I let it happen. Not because I owed anyone nostalgia, because I wanted to see who would show up when the past asked for relevance. The event was held in the parking lot behind the store. A rented tent, folding chairs, a small stage. Employees were encouraged to attend, but not required. I arrived 10 minutes early. Robert was already there, standing stiffly near the stage, greeting people with the air of a man pretending he still had a title. Linda stood beside him, composed, smiling carefully, scanning faces. When she saw me, her smile faltered, then returned sharper. "Evelyn," she said, "you came." "I own the building," I replied. It felt appropriate. Her eyes flashed. "This isn't about ownership." I nodded. "Everything is." She turned away. People filled in slowly. Employees, vendors, a few local officials, curious neighbors. Michael didn't come. That didn't surprise me. Robert took the stage first. He spoke about history, about values, about family. He avoided mentioning names. When he finished, polite applause followed. Then the microphone was passed to me. No announcement, no build-up, just a pause. I stepped onto the stage. "I wasn't planning to speak today," I said calmly. "But I want to clarify something." The crowd quieted. This store has always been about people. The ones who show up early, the ones who stay late, the ones who make small decisions that keep everything running. Linda shifted in her seat. "For a long time," I continued, "those people weren't listened to, including me." A murmur rippled. "I didn't buy the store out of revenge," I said. "I bought it because I understood it." I looked directly at Linda then. "Understanding comes from proximity," I said. "From being dismissed. From being told to stay in your place while watching systems fail." Silence. "This isn't a family business anymore," I said evenly. "It's a business with accountability." I stepped back. That was it. No accusations, no names. The applause came slowly, then built. Not loud, solid. Afterward, people approached me quietly. Employees thanked me. Vendors asked about next steps. A city council member shook my hand. Linda didn't come near me again. Robert did. "I didn't think you'd do that," he said. "I didn't do it for you," I replied. He nodded. "I see that now." That night, the fallout came fast. Linda called. "You humiliated us," she said, voice tight. "I stated facts," I replied. "You turned people against us," she accused. "No," I said. "I stopped protecting you from consequences." She went quiet. "You've changed the narrative," she said finally. I smiled faintly. "You never gave me one." She hung up. The next morning, Robert emailed his resignation from the advisory board. No drama, no message, just a line. I accepted it. The local paper ran a small piece about the event. Neutral tone. Focused on transition. No scandal. That was the real victory. Michael texted me once more that week. "I saw the article," I replied. "I did too. Nothing else." At the store, morale improved. People stopped waiting for the past to return. They planned forward. Elaine proposed a customer loyalty initiative. Carlos restructured inventory flow. Todd resigned quietly, citing personal reasons. I didn't replace him immediately. Sometimes absence solves problems faster than authority. One evening, after closing, I walked the aisles alone. I thought about how small moments accumulate. A comment at a meeting, a laugh into a microphone, a decision not to speak up. That's how power gets misused. Not through villains, through habits. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt finished. Finished explaining. Finished defending. Finished negotiating my worth. The divorce finalized without incident. Michael didn't contest. He didn't ask for anything. He sent one last message. "I hope you're happy," I replied. "I'm at peace." That was the truth. The store wasn't perfect. Neither was I. But the system no longer required anyone to be smaller, so someone else could feel large. And that was enough. One chapter remained. Not about revenge. Not about family, but about what happens after you stop surviving and start choosing. That part was quieter and stronger. After Founders Day, the town settled into a new rhythm. Not everyone approved. Approval was never the goal. What changed was certainty. People knew who made decisions now. They knew where to bring problems. They knew the answers wouldn't be filtered through pride or nostalgia. That kind of clarity calms places. At the store, systems held. Carlos Mendoza adjusted ordering schedules based on real data instead of habit. Elaine Brooks ran front-end operations with quiet authority, correcting mistakes without humiliation. Employees stopped asking permission to suggest improvements. They simply spoke. That shift mattered more than ownership papers. At home, the quiet deepened. Not the sharp kind, the kind that lets you hear yourself think. I repainted the kitchen, gave away furniture Michael had chosen because it looked executive. I replaced it with things that felt useful, solid, unimpressive, comfortable. One evening, Miriam Lawson called to check in. "You've weathered the hardest part," she said. "Public transition." "I didn't find it hard," I replied. She laughed softly. "That tells me everything." We talked about my grandmother, Dorothy Ellis, about how she'd structured the inheritance with flexibility instead of spectacle. "She trusted your judgment," Miriam said. "I know," I replied. That trust had changed how I moved through the world. I didn't over-explain anymore. I didn't rush to fill silence. I didn't preemptively soften statements to make them easier to swallow. People adjusted, or they didn't. Either way, I kept moving. Linda Hargrove tried one last time to reclaim ground. She requested a private meeting to talk as women. I agreed, but on my terms. Public cafe, midday. She arrived dressed carefully, hair immaculate, posture composed. The same presentation she'd always used to establish rank. "You look well," she said. "So do you," I replied. She didn't order anything. "I don't understand why you had to take everything," she said. I tilted my head. "I didn't take everything. I took responsibility." She scoffed. "You destroyed a family legacy." "No," I said calmly. I exposed how fragile it was. Her eyes hardened. "You're cold." I met her gaze. "I'm clear." She leaned forward. "You could have left quietly." I nodded. "You're right. And you could have treated me with respect." Silence stretched between us. "That was never enough for you," she said finally. I smiled faintly. "That's projection." She left without finishing the conversation. I didn't follow. That was another boundary. At work, I declined a second acquisition offer. This one came with a premium. Enough money to retire early, comfortably. I read it twice, then declined again. Not because I was sentimental, because I was building something that didn't need rescuing. I hired a compliance officer, brought in training programs, created promotion tracks that were written down, not implied. No favorites, no guesswork. People noticed. Turnover dropped further. Applications increased. The store became known as a place where work didn't cost you your dignity. That reputation traveled. One afternoon, a cashier named Brianna asked if she could talk to me. She sat across from me in the office, hands folded tightly. "My husband works here too," she said. "Different department." I nodded. "He treats me like I don't matter at work," she continued. "Like what I do is smaller." I listened. "What would you tell someone like me?" she asked. I thought for a moment. "I would tell her that people show you who they are when they think your options are limited," I said. "Your job is to expand your options, not convince them to be better." She nodded slowly, absorbing it. That was how healing worked now. Not through speeches, through precision. Michael didn't contact me again. Through mutual friends, I heard he'd moved states, started over, told people the story in a way that made him the victim of sudden change. I didn't correct it. That story wasn't mine to manage anymore. The divorce decree arrived in the mail one afternoon. Final. I signed it, scanned it, filed it, then went back to work. That evening, I walked through the store one last time before closing, not as a test, as a habit. The lights reflected off clean floors. Shelves were full. Employees laughed near the break room. Nothing dramatic, everything functioning. I realized then that revenge had never been the point. Revenge keeps you tied to the moment you were wronged. What I'd done was step out of that moment entirely. I'd refused to let dismissal define the rest of my life. I'd refused to trade silence for acceptance. The lesson wasn't that power corrupts. It was that invisibility does. When people don't see you, they feel entitled to decide for you. When you decide for yourself, systems rearrange. Not because you're loud, because you're consistent. I locked the office and turned off the lights. Outside, the parking lot was nearly empty. I sat in my car for a moment, hands on the wheel, breathing. There was one chapter left. Not in public, not in business, but in choosing what I would build for myself beyond reaction. That choice felt quiet, intentional, uncomplicated. And that was how I knew it was real. The last decision I made about the store wasn't strategic. It was personal, not emotional. Personal. It happened on an ordinary Thursday morning when I stood at Register 3 during a rush because someone had called out sick. Elaine asked if I wanted to step in. I said yes, without thinking. My hands remembered immediately. The rhythm, the pace, the quiet focus. A customer looked up at me and paused. "Aren't you the owner?" "Yes," I said, scanning her groceries. She smiled. "That's good to see." That was it. No praise, no awe, just respect. After the rush, I went back to my office and sat down with a clarity I hadn't felt since my grandmother's letter. I didn't want to be a distant figure. I wanted to be present without being trapped. So I restructured my role. I hired a general manager from outside the family. Experienced, neutral, accountable. Someone who didn't owe loyalty to history. I kept oversight. I kept veto power. But I stepped back from daily control, not because I couldn't handle it, because I didn't need to prove anything anymore. The store no longer needed to be a battleground. It had become stable ground. That weekend, I visited my grandmother Dorothy Ellis's grave for the first time since everything settled. I stood there quietly, hands in my coat pocket. "You were right," I said aloud. "Watching taught me everything." I didn't ask for anything. I didn't promise anything. I just stood there until the wind picked up and reminded me that time keeps moving, whether we mark it or not. When I got back, I finalized something else. I sold a minority stake in the store, not to a chain, to the employees. A cooperative structure. Gradual. Earned. Transparent. People cried, not because of money, because someone trusted them. Linda Hargrove heard about it through someone else. She didn't call. Robert sent a short email. "You've taken it further than I ever did," I replied. That was the point. Michael never reached out again. And for the first time, I didn't wonder if he ever would. That chapter was complete. On my birthday, I didn't throw a party. I took the day off. I walked through the town without being recognized as anything but a woman buying coffee and bread. That anonymity felt earned. At night, I sat at my kitchen table and wrote a list. Not goals, not regrets, definitions. What respect looks like, what partnership requires, what silence means when it's chosen instead of imposed. I realized something then that felt like the real ending. The money didn't save me. The store didn't validate me. Even the control didn't define me. What changed everything was the moment I stopped negotiating my worth with people who benefited from me doubting it. Revenge had never been my fuel. Self-respect was. And self-respect doesn't announce itself. It builds, quietly, brick by brick. If you've listened this far, I want to say something clearly. If you're being dismissed, minimized, or told to stay in your place, it's not because you're incapable. It's because someone else needs you to be. You don't have to burn anything down. You don't have to prove them wrong out loud. You just have to stop letting their version of you be the final one. If this story resonated with you, like it, comment, and subscribe for more real-life family drama stories about betrayal, karma, and quiet payback. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from. The people who learn to choose themselves rarely do it alone.